The letter arrived in late January, almost unnoticed amidst the usual stack of bills and junk mail. It was a standard update from the county assessor's office, informing Michael that the estimated market value of his modest 3-bedroom home had increased by another 7 fancham in the past year. Nothing overtly dramatic, just a routine adjustment in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Yet, for Michael, that single percentage point, multiplied year after year, represented something far more significant than a rising property tax bill. He thought about Robert, his college roommate. They'd started their careers at roughly the same time, in similar roles, earning comparable salaries for decades. Both worked hard, both navigated economic shifts, and both built respectable lives. But when Michael looked at that letter, he knew their financial realities had diverged in ways neither of them could have predicted back when their biggest worry was student loan debt. The subtle, continuous upward creep of that single number on the assessor's letter wasn't just about real estate. It was a quiet testament to a profound shift in how financial security is built in America. A shift that increasingly favors not just what you earn, but what you own. This quiet transformation has altered the very landscape of opportunity, leaving many to wonder if working hard by itself is still enough. For generations, the American dream was often described as a ladder, each rung representing a steady climb fueled by consistent employment. A reliable paycheck was the bedrock. It bought the first home, supported a growing family, funded a comfortable retirement, and promised a steadily improving standard of living. This was the implicit social contract: work diligently, and prosperity would follow. Yet, for many, that ladder now feels less stable, perhaps even less accessible, while individual effort remains fundamental. A growing body of evidence suggests that the equation for financial well-being has subtly but profoundly shifted. Take the median American household, for example. Over the past few decades, its real wages, adjusted for inflation, have seen only modest gains, often struggling to keep pace with the rising costs of essentials. This trend is particularly stark when looking at housing. While wages have crept up, the cost of a home has surged, especially in recent years. Many reports indicate that the ratio of home prices to income has reached historic highs, often requiring a significantly larger portion of a family's earnings than it did even a generation ago. This isn't just about metropolitan areas. The ripple effect is felt across suburban and even rural markets, making the initial step onto the property ladder an increasingly daunting leap for younger generations. How then does one build wealth when the very foundation of traditional security seems to be moving further out of reach? This widening gap between stagnant wages and escalating costs extends beyond housing. Healthcare premiums, educational expenses, and even the daily cost of groceries have absorbed an ever larger share of household budgets. For many, this means that even with two incomes, the feeling of financial momentum, the sense of getting ahead, has become elusive. It's a paradox. People are working harder, often taking on additional hours or side gigs, yet the path to true financial security feels more arduous than ever. The answer, many economists argue, lies in understanding a powerful, often unseen force: the appreciation of assets. Income pays the bills today, but assets, whether a home, stocks, or a small business, are increasingly determining long-term wealth. This isn't about advocating for specific investments, nor is it a critique of work itself. Instead, it's an observation of a structural shift where capital, once accumulated, can generate value in ways that earned income alone often cannot match. Consider the cumulative effect. A home bought decades ago, even a modest one, has likely seen its value multiply significantly, often far outpacing the wage growth of its owner. The same can be said for retirement accounts, which, through consistent contributions and market gains, compound silently in the background. The quiet power of these assets, appreciating year after year, creates a growing buffer, a form of economic resilience that separates those who benefit from it from those who rely almost entirely on their next paycheck. It's a fundamental difference that we see playing out in the lives of many, including individuals like Michael. Michael, at 56, found himself in a familiar routine. His alarm chirped just before 6, signaling another day in his role as a corporate manager for a mid-sized logistics firm. His household income, combined with his wife Sarah's part-time work, hovered around $190,000 annually. It was a comfortable living, certainly allowing for 2 children in college, a few family vacations, and the occasional home renovation project. Yet, the sense of security he felt wasn't entirely derived from that steady stream of earnings. He remembered the early 90s, fresh out of college, when he and Sarah bought their first home. It was a modest starter house, needing work, in a neighborhood that few considered desirable at the time. The mortgage felt like a monumental commitment, a weight of responsibility they carried every month. The price then, just under $150,000, was a stretch on their combined entry-level salaries, but it felt achievable. Today, that same house, after a few expansions and significant market appreciation, would easily fetch over $500,000. That appreciation, unseen and unearned in the traditional sense, had quietly become the largest component of their family's wealth. Beyond the house, there were the retirement accounts. From his very first job, Michael had methodically contributed to his 401(k), often stretching to maximize the employer match. Sarah, too, had consistently funded an IRA. For decades, these investments felt like distant, abstract numbers on a quarterly statement. They saw the market's ups and downs, the occasional dip followed by a steady climb. Now, as retirement drew closer, those once abstract numbers had matured into a substantial sum, a second pillar of their financial well-being that operated independently of their monthly paychecks. Just last week, Michael had received a notice from his financial advisor about an upcoming portfolio review. It was scheduled for next month, and it included a detailed projection of their post-retirement income, heavily weighted by the growth of these accumulated assets. The letter, with its charts and figures, wasn't just a technical document. It was a vivid illustration of how the slow, patient accumulation of capital had fundamentally reshaped their future. It underscored a reality that many of his younger colleagues, struggling with student debt and soaring housing costs, found increasingly difficult to grasp. He thought about a conversation he'd had with his son, Mark, who was navigating the complexities of buying his own first home. Mark, an engineer, earned a salary that was, in real terms, higher than Michael's starting wage. Yet, the entry point into homeownership felt almost impossibly high for him. The down payment alone represented years of diligent saving, a stark contrast to Michael's own experience. This difference wasn't about Mark's work ethic. It was about the vastly different economic landscape they inhabited. A landscape where the cost of entry into the asset class of real estate had dramatically outpaced wage growth. This divergence wasn't lost on Michael. He saw friends and colleagues, some earning even more than he did, yet struggling to build the same sense of long-term security because they hadn't been able to acquire appreciating assets early enough, or simply hadn't focused on it. Their income paid the bills, but it didn't generate the quiet, compounding growth that his home and investments had. It felt like walking on a treadmill. You could run faster, but the ground beneath you wasn't moving forward in the same way. The upcoming financial review wasn't just a checkup. It was a moment of reckoning, a tangible representation of how decades of quiet accumulation had created a different kind of financial freedom. It meant that even if his current salary were to diminish, or if economic uncertainties arose, a significant portion of their lifestyle and security would be maintained by forces beyond his direct labor. This isn't just Michael's story. It's a reflection of a broader, systemic trend where the fundamental drivers of wealth have shifted, quietly, beneath the surface of everyday work. This quiet transformation, seen in Michael's home value and retirement balance, is not an isolated phenomenon, but a reflection of deeper structural forces at play within the American economy. Over the past several decades, the landscape of wealth creation has been reshaped by a confluence of factors, making asset ownership an increasingly dominant driver of financial security. The long-term trajectory of the stock market, for instance, has, despite periodic corrections, delivered substantial average annual returns that often outpace wage growth, especially when compounded over decades. Similarly, the housing market, a cornerstone of middle-class wealth, has seen periods of significant appreciation. While local market dynamics and zoning policies certainly play a role in restricting supply and driving up prices in certain areas, the broader trend has been an increase in home values that has often far exceeded the rate at which average incomes have grown. This creates a powerful wealth-building engine for those who already own property, while simultaneously making it more challenging for new entrants to afford a down payment and access that same engine. It's worth acknowledging that some might argue that these trends reflect individual choices rather than systemic pressures, or that the quality of goods and services, including housing, has improved, thus justifying higher prices. Others might point to the benefits of a robust stock market for all investors, or the increasing access to investment vehicles like 401(k). Indeed, personal financial discipline and wise investment decisions are undeniably crucial. However, these individual factors alone struggle to fully explain the sheer scale of the shift, particularly when we observe the widening gap between median household wealth and median income, suggesting something larger is at play. The very mechanism of inflation also plays a subtle yet profound role. While wages might increase if the cost of living, particularly for essential assets like housing, rises faster, the purchasing power of that income erodes. Assets, however, often act as a hedge against inflation. A home's value, for example, typically appreciates with inflationary pressures, protecting the owner's equity. Stocks, representing ownership in businesses, can also adapt to inflation by increasing prices for their products and services, thus preserving or even enhancing shareholder value. Consider the phenomenon of compound returns. Albert Einstein famously called it the eighth wonder of the world, and its power is particularly evident in retirement accounts. Regular, even modest, contributions made early in a career can grow exponentially over time, not just from new savings, but from the returns on the returns themselves. This allows capital to generate more capital, a self-sustaining cycle that is largely independent of an individual's ongoing labor, creating a powerful advantage for those who can access and maintain these accounts over long periods. Beyond homes and public markets, business equity also serves as a potent wealth builder. For entrepreneurs, the value of their company can grow through innovation, market expansion, and strategic decisions, often far exceeding the salary they might draw from the business itself. This equity, whether realized through a sale or passed down through generations, represents another form of asset-driven wealth that diverges from earned income. Even the tax system subtly reinforces this dynamic. Capital gains, the profit from selling an asset, are often taxed at a lower rate than ordinary income, particularly for long-term holdings. This difference, while designed to incentivize investment and long-term economic growth, inherently favors those who accumulate wealth through assets over those who earn it primarily through labor. It's a policy lever that, intentionally or not, contributes to the growing importance of ownership. This cumulative effect of appreciating assets, compound returns, and specific tax treatments creates a feedback loop. Those who own assets see their wealth grow, enabling them to acquire more assets or pass wealth to the next generation. This intergenerational transfer of wealth, whether through inheritance or financial assistance, gives younger generations a significant head start in the race to asset accumulation, further solidifying the importance of ownership from an early age. The quiet truth is that for many, financial security is no longer solely a function of how hard they work, but increasingly, how much their accumulated capital works for them. This creates a psychological divide, an invisible line separating those who feel secure in their financial trajectory from those who constantly chase the next paycheck. This silent accumulation, this growing power of capital, creates what might be called the ownership divide, a subtle yet profound psychological split in how Americans experience financial security. Many households still operate on the old paradigm, measuring their progress by annual income, by the raise they hope for, or by the next bonus. Their sense of stability, their ability to plan for the future, rests almost entirely on the consistent arrival of that paycheck. It's a constant, active pursuit, a treadmill where the speed must be maintained. For these families, major life events, a child's college tuition, an unexpected medical bill, or the dream of a comfortable retirement can feel like immense, often terrifying financial hurdles. There's a persistent low hum of anxiety, a sense that one misstep, one job loss, or one market downturn could unravel years of diligent work. This chronic stress isn't always visible, but it shapes daily decisions, limits risk-taking, and quietly erodes the long-term confidence that was once a hallmark of the middle class. In stark contrast are those on the other side of the divide. Households whose wealth is quietly growing in the background, almost independent of their immediate labor. For them, income still pays for daily life, but it's the appreciating assets, the rising value of their home, the compounding returns in their investment portfolio, the equity in a family business that provide a deep, often subconscious, layer of financial resilience. These assets don't just provide a safety net. They offer a sense of freedom, the possibility of choices that aren't dictated by the next pay cycle. This distinction becomes most apparent and most unsettling when major life decisions arise. For those without significant assets, sending a child to college might mean taking on substantial debt, sacrificing retirement savings, or even delaying necessary medical procedures. The stress of these choices can be immense, forcing trade-offs that reverberate for years. But for those with accumulated assets, these same decisions, while still requiring careful planning, are often approached with a much greater sense of flexibility and control. The assets provide leverage, a silent partner that opens doors rather than closing them. The psychological impact extends to generational expectations. Younger generations, looking at their parents and grandparents, see a path to prosperity that seems increasingly out of reach. They witness the struggle to afford a first home, the burden of student debt, and the rising cost of living, all while hearing stories of a time when a single income could support a family and build substantial equity. This creates a disconnect, a growing skepticism about whether hard work alone can still deliver the same outcomes, fostering a sense of resignation or even resentment toward a system that seems to reward inherited capital more than earned labor. This isn't to say that effort no longer matters. It absolutely does. But the rules of engagement have changed. The quiet growth of assets means that the finish line for financial security often moves faster than the speed at which one can earn income. It's a subtle game of catch-up, where those starting with capital have an inherent advantage, compounding their lead over time. This creates a feeling of a rigged race, even if no one consciously designed it that way. The psychological toll is profound, leaving many to wonder if their diligence is enough to keep them from falling behind in a landscape increasingly defined by what they own rather than what they do. The county assessor's letter, with its routine update on Michael's home value, was more than just a piece of mail. It was a tangible symbol of this shift, a quiet echo of how his life and the lives of many others have been shaped by forces beyond their paychecks. Work, in its purest form, remains one of the foundational pillars of the American economy. It provides purpose, fosters innovation, creates stability, and offers a crucial avenue for personal and professional growth. The act of earning, of contributing one's labor and intellect, will always be central to individual dignity and societal function. But the quiet transformation we've witnessed, reflected in the diverging paths of friends like Michael and Robert, suggests that the relationship between work and financial security has grown more complex. The letter from the county assessor, that innocuous piece of paper, detailing a 7% increase in property value, wasn't just about Michael's home. It was a testament to how profoundly the scales have shifted. For decades, the reliable paycheck was the primary engine of upward mobility. Today, while indispensable for daily living, income often feels like it's running in place against the accelerating pace of asset appreciation. This doesn't diminish the value of hard work, but rather highlights that hard work alone, without the compounding tailwind of ownership, increasingly struggles to keep pace. The true transformation of modern prosperity is not that effort matters less, but that ownership now matters more than many realize. It's the silent partner in the background, shaping futures, offering resilience, and often creating a significant, almost invisible, divide between those who accumulate capital and those who primarily earn. Understanding this nuanced distinction helps explain why two families with similar careers and comparable incomes can arrive at vastly different levels of financial freedom. It forces us to ask, in an economy increasingly defined by what one owns, what does it truly mean to be financially secure?